Nobody believed Tommy Carter when he said the knights in Millbrook were alive, but then again, nobody had ever stayed awake long enough to see what he saw. The small town tucked away in the Appalachian foothills of Kentucky had one rule that everyone followed without question: be inside before sunset, lock your doors, and never, ever look outside until morning. Tommy was 12 years old when he first broke that rule, and what he discovered would haunt him for the rest of his life. It started 3 months after his family moved from Louisville to Millbrook, a town so small it didn't even have a gas station, just a general store, a church, and rows of weathered houses that looked like they'd been standing since before electricity was invented. His father had taken a job at the lumber mill, and his mother thought the quiet country life would be good for Tommy and his younger sister, Emma. But there was something wrong with Millbrook, something that sat heavy in the air like the humidity before a storm. The townspeople were friendly enough during the day, waving from their porches, chatting at the store, but as soon as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, a change would come over them. Conversations would stop mid-sentence, smiles would fade, and people would rush home with a panic in their eyes that Tommy couldn't understand. His mother told him it was just how country folk were, early to bed and early to rise, but Tommy noticed how she would check every window lock twice, how his father would stand at the front door for a long moment before finally turning away, and how Emma would cry softly in her bed until she fell asleep. The first disappearance happened on a Tuesday. Old Mr. Henderson, who lived at the end of their street, didn't come out for his morning coffee. By noon, Sheriff Dalton was at the house, and by evening, the whole town knew that Mr. Henderson's bed hadn't been slept in, his back door was wide open, and his reading glasses were found in the middle of the road, shattered. Nobody said the word missing though, they said gone, as if there was a difference, as if everyone already knew he wouldn't be coming back. Tommy's father warned him that night, his voice low and serious in a way it had never been before. Son, I don't care what you hear, what you think you see. You stay in your room after dark. Promise me. Tommy promised, but promises are fragile things when curiosity burns hot enough. It was a Friday when Tommy decided he couldn't take the mystery anymore. He had been collecting evidence like a detective, writing down everything strange he noticed. The way all the dogs in town were kept inside at night, how nobody owned cats, the scratch marks on the outside of Mr. Henderson's house that looked like they'd been made by something with claws the size of kitchen knives, and the way his own bedroom window would sometimes fog up from the outside, as if something warm and breathing had been pressed against it. That night, after his parents checked on him and Emma was asleep down the hall, Tommy positioned himself by his window with his father's binoculars, a flashlight, and his mother's old film camera that he'd found in the attic. The sun set at 7:43, and by 8 o'clock, the town was silent as a graveyard. At first, nothing happened, and Tommy felt foolish, fighting to keep his eyes open as the clock ticked toward 9. Then he heard it. Footsteps on the gravel road outside, slow and deliberate, but wrong somehow, the rhythm off, like someone learning to walk. Tommy pressed himself against the wall beside his window and carefully peered out through a gap in the curtains. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. Mrs. Greenwood, the sweet elderly woman who ran the general store and always gave him free candy, was walking down the middle of the street in her nightgown, her arms hanging at her sides, her head tilted back at an angle that should have broken her neck. She wasn't alone. Behind her, moving with that same mechanical wrongness, were Mr. Patterson, the young couple from the church, and at least a dozen other townspeople, all walking in single file toward the woods at the edge of town. Tommy grabbed the camera with shaking hands and started taking pictures through the window, the flash off, praying nobody would see. That's when he noticed something that made his stomach drop. These people weren't walking on their own. In the moonlight, he could see thin, glistening strands attached to their backs, their heads, their arms like puppet strings, and when he followed those strands upward, He saw them disappearing into the darkness above the houses, into shapes that moved against the night sky. Massive and silent, with too many legs and eyes that reflected the moonlight like dozens of tiny moons. Tommy bit down on his fist to keep from screaming. The procession continued for hours, and Tommy documented every second of it, his child's mind struggling to process what his eyes were showing him. The people of Millbrook weren't going to bed early because they were country folk. They were going to bed early because something was collecting them, using them, walking them through the streets like marionettes made of flesh and bone. Around midnight, the parade stopped, and the townspeople began to return, walking backward the way they came, those terrible strings guiding them back to their homes. Tommy watched as Mrs. Greenwood walked right up to her front door, and then the strings detached with a wet sound he could somehow hear even through his closed window, and she crumpled to her porch like a doll whose strings had been cut. 5 minutes later, her porch light came on, and she appeared in her doorway, perfectly normal, waving to Mr. Patterson across the street as if they'd both just woken up from a pleasant sleep. Tommy didn't go to school the next day. He told his mother he was sick, which wasn't entirely a lie since he'd thrown up twice before dawn. He spent the day developing the pictures in the dark room at school that he snuck into, his hands shaking as the images appeared in the chemical bath. The photos showed everything, the people walking, the strings, and in one terrible, clear shot, one of the creatures above, its body like a massive spider but wrong, with a face that looked almost human, almost familiar, wearing skin like a badly fitted mask. Tommy knew he had to tell someone, but who would believe him? His parents would think he was having nightmares. The sheriff was one of the people he'd seen on those strings last night, and the other kids at school already thought he was weird because he was from the city. He decided to talk to the one person in town who might listen, Father McKinley, the old priest who ran the small church and who always seemed to watch the sunset with sad, knowing eyes. That Sunday, Tommy waited until after service and approached the priest in the empty church. "Father, I need to tell you something about what happens here at night," Tommy whispered, and he saw the old man's face go pale. Father McKinley grabbed Tommy's arm, not roughly but urgently, and pulled him into the small office behind the altar. "You've seen them," the priest said, and it wasn't a question. "How long have you known?" Tommy asked, and Father McKinley sank into his chair like a man carrying the weight of the world. 40 years, he said quietly. "I came to Millbrook as a young priest, full of faith and fire, ready to save souls. By my second week, I knew something was wrong. By my second month, I'd seen what you've seen. By my second year, I'd tried everything I could think of to stop it, and I'd failed." The priest explained that the creatures had been in Millbrook longer than anyone could remember, living in the caves that honeycombed the mountains, coming out only at night to feed on something they needed from humans, something he couldn't quite explain, but that left people hollowed out inside. Going through the motions of life, but never quite alive. "Why don't people leave?" Tommy asked, and Father McKinley laughed bitterly. "They try. Some families pack up and drive away, but they always come back within a week, can't even remember why they left. It's like the creatures have marked everyone in this town, claimed them. The only ones who can leave are those who were born elsewhere and haven't been here long enough to be marked." Tommy felt hope surge in his chest. "My family has only been here 3 months. We can leave." But Father McKinley shook his head. "Your parents have already been marked. I can see it in their eyes during service. But you and your sister, you might still have time. Maybe a week, maybe less." That night, Tommy tried to convince his parents to leave, making up stories about missing Louisville, about Emma being unhappy, about anything he could think of, but his parents just smiled distantly and told him to go to bed. He could see it now, what Father McKinley had mentioned, a certain emptiness in their eyes, like they were looking at him from very far away. Tommy knew he had only one choice. He packed 2 backpacks, one for him and one for Emma, with clothes, food, and all the money from his parents' emergency jar. He wrote a note explaining everything, even though he knew they probably wouldn't understand it, and he tucked his developed photographs inside. At 2 in the morning, he woke Emma, put a finger to her lips, and whispered that they were going on an adventure. Emma, still half asleep and trusting her big brother completely, nodded and let him dress her in warm clothes. They crept down the stairs, past their parents' bedroom where soft breathing came from within, and out through the kitchen door that Tommy had secretly unlocked earlier. The night air was cold and alive with sounds that Tommy had never noticed before: clicking, scraping, whispers that might have been wind but probably weren't. He held Emma's hand tight and ran toward the road that led out of town, the same road his family had driven in on 3 months ago. They almost made it. They were 50 feet from the town limit. Tommy could see the sign that read, "Leaving Millbrook, come back soon," when Emma stopped suddenly, her hand going rigid in his. "Tommy," she whispered, "there's someone behind us." He turned slowly, his heart hammering, and saw Mrs. Greenwood standing in the middle of the road, still in her nightgown, but this time she was smiling, and in the moonlight, Tommy could see that her smile was too wide, stretching past where a human smile should end. "Going somewhere, children?" she asked, but it wasn't her voice. It was multiple voices layered on top of each other, speaking in unison. Tommy pulled Emma behind him. "Let us go," he said, trying to sound brave. "We don't belong here." "Everyone belongs here," the Mrs. Greenwood thing said, and then the strings descended from above, dozens of them, glistening and wet, reaching for the children. Tommy did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed Emma, covered her with his body, and screamed, "Father McKinley, help us." For a moment, nothing happened, and Tommy felt the strings brushing against his back, cold and alive. Then light flooded the road, bright and pure, and Tommy looked up to see Father McKinley standing 50 feet away, holding a crucifix that glowed like it had captured a piece of the sun. "Not these children," the priest said, his voice stronger than Tommy had ever heard it. "Take me instead. I'm old, I'm tired, and I'm ready. But you let these two go." The creatures above hissed and clicked, and Mrs. Greenwood's body contorted, her head spinning completely around. "You dare bargain with us, priest? You who have hidden in your church for 40 years. "Yes," Father McKinley said simply. "A life for 2 lives. It's a good trade, and you know you can't refuse. It's the old law, the one that even things like you have to follow." There was a long, terrible silence, and then the strings detached from Mrs. Greenwood, who collapsed to the ground, and instead descended toward Father McKinley. The old priest looked at Tommy one last time.
"Run, boy.
"Take your sister and don't look back. And when you get to Louisville, tell them what happened here. Tell them about Millbrook. Even if they don't believe you, tell them." Tommy grabbed Emma and ran, tears streaming down his face, as behind him, Father McKinley's screams rose into the night sky. They didn't stop running until they reached a gas station 20 miles away, where a kind trucker found them shaking and crying and called the police. Tommy told his story to the officers, to the social workers, to the psychiatrists, and nobody believed him, just as Father McKinley had predicted. His parents were found in their home, alive but unresponsive, and were committed to a psychiatric facility where they remained for the rest of their lives, staring at nothing, smiling at nothing, remembering nothing. Emma was too young to remember much, and as she grew up, the events of that night faded into something she thought was just a bad dream. But Tommy remembered everything, and when he turned 18, he went back to Millbrook, just once, in broad daylight, with the photographs he'd kept hidden all those years. The town was still there, still quiet, still following its unspoken rules. He went to the church and found a new priest, A young man who looked at Tommy with suspicious eyes. "I'm looking for Father McKinley," Tommy said. "Oh, he passed away years ago," the young priest replied. "Very suddenly," they said. "Heart attack in the middle of the night." Strange though, they never found his body, just his clothes in the middle of the street. Tommy left Millbrook that day and never went back, but sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is full, he thinks about the people still living there, walking their streets after dark, thinking they're going to bed but really dancing on strings held by ancient things that feed in the darkness. And he wonders if Father McKinley is still screaming somewhere in those caves, or if he finally found peace, or if peace is something that places like Millbrook simply don't allow. The photographs are in a safety deposit box now, and Tommy has written his story down dozens of times, sending it to newspapers and websites and anyone who might listen, but nobody ever does, because the truth about some places is too terrible to believe. And sometimes the monsters aren't hiding under the bed but above our heads, pulling strings we can't see, making us dance to songs we can't hear, in towns that look normal until the sun goes down and the real faces come out. 20 years later, Tommy still locks his doors at sunset, and he teaches his own children to do the same. And when they ask him why, he tells them that some rules don't need explanations, they just need to be followed. Because the world is full of places where people go and never come back, and the worst part isn't the disappearing, it's the returning, changed and hollow, with smiles that stretch just a little too wide and eyes that look at you from very, very far away.